My name is Hannah, and this is my beauty budget. Hey y'all, I am so excited to finally be filming this video. I had the idea a couple of weeks ago and I just haven't had time to film it, and I also needed some time to gather all of the information together. I had to remember all of the palettes, track them all down, get the pictures, get the prices, add all the prices up. In this video, I'm going to be revisiting all of the palettes that I have wanted but not purchased pretty much in the past 2 years. So I'm going to go through my no-buy year and then this year. And the idea is just to revisit those feelings and check in about them. I'm always talking about how those intense desires that drive us frequently to purchase things, especially when we know rationally that we don't need them, we don't need any makeup, but I think a lot of times when we say that we don't need something, what we mean is that it doesn't provide anything that the makeup that we already have provides. Did that sentence come out right? We often mean that we don't need it to get the looks that it provides because we can already get those looks with what we already have, right? So a lot of times what causes us to override that knowledge is this intense desire, this emotional desire that grips us. It's sort of these releases, they push our buttons, they trigger us, they make us feel like our identities will wane if we don't acquire these things. So I'm hoping that by going back through all of these palettes on camera with you guys, I can help put in perspective for myself how fleeting those desires are. Well, I guess what I should say is I can help put those desires in perspective, realize how fleeting they are, realize how many releases they are that we want, and by adding all of it up and seeing how much I actually would have spent if I had given in to all of those desires, I can share with you why it's good that I didn't buy literally any of these. You get the idea. Let's go ahead and get into the meat of the video. All right, I feel like I blabbered on in the intro, but I'm not going to do that during the video because there are 35 eyeshadow palettes. They're not all eyeshadow. Most of them are eyeshadow, but there are 35 palettes on this list. I'm just going to give you the palette and why I wanted it, and maybe how I feel about it now. So the first thing on the list, and I tried to go in rough chronological order. I'm sure I didn't get it in an exact chronological order, but I tried to go in rough chronological order. One of the first things that I wanted during my no-buy year but that I couldn't buy because I was on a no-buy was the Colourpop in-nude-endo highlighting palette. Do you remember that? It was a 6-pan highlighter palette. I had a Colourpop highlighter already. I had the one called Here Kitty Kitty. Now, as post no-buy Hannah, I do not understand why I wanted the palette when I already had a Colourpop highlighter that I really wanted. I think maybe Kathleen Lights was going on and on about how it was a new and improved formula, and one of them in there was like so amazing. But also now, as post no-buy Hannah, I don't understand why I wanted 6 highlighters when really there was just one in the palette that was the perfect one for me. I genuinely remember wanting the palette for one highlighter. And at the time, that would have been a good enough reason to buy it. And that seems so idiotic to me now. But I clearly remember towards the beginning of my no-buy year saying to myself, and maybe to you guys on camera, if I weren't on a no-buy, I would have already bought this. And that was absolutely true. The Smashbox Photo Edit Eyeshadow Trio in Showmance. Do you guys even remember this release? Smashbox released this little trio eyeshadows. And it was one of those situations where I looked at the whole range and I was like, that's the one for me. And the fact that I could identify the one that was for me made me want to buy it. I remember thinking without a shadow of a doubt that if I hadn't been on a no-buy, I would have bought that too. And this was back when I still kind of had a passing interest in Smashbox eyeshadows, which I don't anymore. I haven't really had any great experiences with them. And there's so much else that's good. It's like, why? But it was only $23 for a high-end brand for 3 shots, and they were cute, and it was very pretty. And I just remember being like, it's so unjust that I'm on a no-buy because $23 would be nothing, which is vaguely, idiotically true in isolation, but when they all add up, it becomes so not true, which is kind of the point of this video. So really wanted that, probably would have bought it. The Natasha Denona Diamond and Blush Palette. So this was, I think, maybe Natasha Denona's first time releasing one of these glamorous, big, chunky, gleaming face palettes. And I was so entranced by this. And I don't know for sure if I would have bought it if I hadn't been on a no-buy. $89. I don't know if I've been saying, the ColourPop palette was $18, Smashbox $23. This one is $89. Even before my no-buy year, I might have been wise enough to bulk at that price. But the crazy thing, but I really wanted it. And that was the rule for being on this list. I really, really wanted it. I refrained from buying it because I was on a no-buy, but I might have refrained from buying it anyway. The crazy thing is, I remember the one that I wanted was the one that had the green in it. That was what really intrigued me. There was this citron highlighter in one of them, but it was in the darker palette. That was the one I wanted. And if I hadn't been on a no-buy and I had given in to my desire, I would have bought that huge face palette for darker skin tones. Why? Why? But that was the one I wanted. I really, really specifically wanted that palette. The Colourpop Fame palette for $23. So right before the beginning of my no-buy year, I had purchased some Colourpop palettes and depotted them, and those singles were my favorite singles pretty much for my whole no-buy year. I really love Colourpop mattes, and when I started my no-buy year, I very shortly realized that I just didn't have very many cool-toned, neutral, kind of mid-toned, cool-toned matte eyeshadows. I didn't have sort of these taupes, transition shade taupes. And for a lot of time during my no-buy year, I was like, all I want is like a taupe, a good old classic, really neutral taupe. And so when the Fame palette came out, I was like, ooh, that's the one. There's all of these taupes, all these gray taupes. And I was like, as soon as my no-buy year is over, I'm gonna buy it and depot it and have all of those as singles. And of course I did not do that, but at the time I really wanted it, $23. On a similar note, sort of similar, but also the opposite, the Colourpop X Shayla Perception palette, it was the same thing. I didn't have very many like rich colored metallics. And so when that came out, I had a fetish for buying Colourpop palettes and depotting them, buying them basically as collections of singles. So using the Colourpop palette as a way to get a bunch of singles that are smaller pans, because whoever goes through a single really, at a lower price point, because the palettes were less, they cost less than buying all of the singles would have cost. So I had just gotten into that at the end of the year, right before my no-buy. If I hadn't gone on my no-buy year, I would have continued to do that ad infinitum until I had like hundreds of magnetic palettes stacking up. My no-buy year, that was like a behavior that I was just beginning to exhibit that my no-buy year cut off at the pass. And so I would have thrown the Colourpop X Shayla Perception palette into that mill as well, because I wanted singles of all of those beautiful colors and it was getting really great reviews. I just wanted that. $24. The Natasha Denona Star palette is on here. I had wanted that palette badly since it released. So I wanted it and didn't buy it for a long time before my no-buy year. And then during my no-buy year, obviously I didn't buy it because I was on a no-buy, but I continued holding it up as like a carrot on the end of a stick for myself, thinking that I might buy it at the end of the year if I made it through my no-buy. I did receive the Star palette as a gift from a subscriber. She gave her Star palette to me after she had decluttered it toward the end of my no-buy year. So I can't say for certain that I wouldn't have bought it, but I feel actually pretty confident that if I had never received it, I wouldn't have bought it, because even by the time Wendy sent it to me, my desire to spend that much money on a single eyeshadow palette was waning. My no-buy year was kind of killing it. And I think that by the end of the no-buy year, I would have been in a position to talk myself out of buying it for myself. And I also might have been, at that time, more intrigued by Natasha Denona's newer releases. So there's no way to know for sure, because I received it as a gift, whether or not I would have gone on to ever purchase the Star palette. But what I can say, because of how my life did unfold, is that I wanted the Star palette for a really long time and I never bought it. So that was a $169 palette. The Huda Beauty Desert Dusk palette. This one's really interesting because I wanted it. There was a period during my no-buy year where I wanted it so badly. I put it on my birthday wish list. Nobody got it for me. I kept it on that wish list all the way to the holidays, and I was kind of hoping someone would get it for me for Christmas. Like, I wanted it for so long. I wanted it so badly. I loved the color story of the swatches, those rich sort of color shifting duochromes of like purple and red and all of those rich rusty reds. I just really fell hard for the color story of that palette. But after my no-buy year, I didn't buy it. Time passed. I sort of fell out of love with it. I got into other things. I became less enamored by it. Huda Beauty has never really fully captured my attention. I've sort of just been like, except for that one palette. And then when I went to BeautyCon just last month, I was given that palette as a gift. It's very beautiful. I kept it. I kept it in my reckoning because I was like, I've wanted this for so long in theory. I think I've used it just a couple times. Like it's like the desire for it died so completely after I didn't buy it for a long time that actually getting it, actually owning it has not revived the desire. It's like I own it, but I no longer really want it. I'll probably keep it around for a little while and see what happens, but I just think that that one's particularly interesting because it's one I wanted it, I didn't buy it, I stopped wanting it, and then I got it as a gift. The Jaclyn Hill X Morphe Vault. I would absolutely and for sure have purchased this if I hadn't been on a no-buy. I wanted it so bad, and I remember thinking like I really wanted the purple one and I really wanted the like green one, whatever the dark like smoky one was, and if I had purchased both it would have been $30, so I might as well buy the whole vault, which was $50. I remember like going through that thought process in my mind, even though it was my no-buy year, thinking about the way I would have thought about it if I hadn't been on a no-buy. And then the whole release was such a shit show, but I would have purchased it as soon as it was released. So I think I would have, I don't know, I would have gotten those palettes whether they were good quality or not. I would have gotten them on the release, and I can't see myself like returning them. I felt like it didn't have that much eyeshadow. I felt like it didn't have that much colorful eyeshadow. I liked the idea of the different color stories. I wanted it. I wanted the vault, okay? Okay. I even duped the Vibes. That was one of the earliest duping the Vibes videos. Was duping maybe the first one. Was it the first one? Or the second one? Duping the Vibes with that vault because I was mad that I was on a no-buy because I wanted to buy it. Okay, next on the list is the Melt Gemini palette. I wanted this so bad when it was released, those grungy, this is actually same story as the Huda Beauty. It's the exact same story. I wanted it so badly. I was so enamored. It was unusual for its time. It was ahead of its time. Those grungy greens, the mustards, the yellowy mustardy, oh my gosh. And then it had that other side too that had the beautiful warm tone, sort of peachy shimmer, and I was just like, this is the palette straight out of my dreams. I couldn't buy it because I was on a no-buy. It was $58, and I didn't buy it and didn't buy it. My no-buy ended. I continued to not buy it, and then I sort of like stopped really wanting it, even though I was so into the color story. And a subscriber recently decluttered it and sent hers to me, and I've been playing with it, and it's very beautiful. But that fire, that old fire is just gone. And even getting the same palette into my grubby little hands hasn't been able to rekindle that fire. So I'm not totally sure what I'm gonna do with it. I also didn't realize that it's almost all mattes. And maybe last year at this time, or at that time when it released, I didn't know my own mind enough to realize that I'm much more into, I'm into kind of like an 80-20 shimmer matte split. And that palette's more like a 20-80, only 2 shimmers, and are there 8 mattes? Something like that. Anyway, it's not really as much for me as I thought it was, but boy did I want it when it released. The ABH Norvina Palette. This was also one of the first duping the Vibes videos, and the reason I wanted that palette is because of that purple, that beautiful matte purple that just, I didn't have anything like that, and it hadn't even occurred to me to want anything like that. And I was able to dupe the Vibes of the kinds of looks I would have made with the palette to get it through my skull that the palette itself wouldn't really have been something that was unique for me, like the looks I would have gotten, the use I would have gotten out of it. And then I realized how useful duping the Vibes really was, because I was able to kind of mitigate, if not kill, my own desire for it by duping the Vibes with it at that time. But if I had been old Hannah, if I hadn't been trying to come up with ways to mitigate those desires, if I had just been buying things because I was so excited about the new releases and the seemingly new colors, I would have really, really wanted, if not purchased, the ABH Norvina palette when it released. The Natasha Denona, and it was $42, obviously. The Natasha Denona Camel palette is next on the list. This is the first one. I just went through and screenshotted all the pictures before starting to film this video so I could kind of remind myself of all the imagery and all of the palettes in reality. The Natasha Denona Camel palette is one that still makes my heart double beat a little bit. It's the first one on the whole list so far that when I pulled up the picture to screenshot it, I was like, oh, you beauty, you beauty. I was just like, like I would still use this palette, I would still love this. I really love the kind of mustard sand monochromatic palette idea. I just think it's incredibly beautiful. I just wish it were a mini. It's so much money for just 5 colors, and the amount of eyeshadow is just, it's untoward. So I don't think I'm ever gonna buy it, but I wanted it and I still want it and I've never bought it. $48 I've saved there. Okay, this next one, I think I am out of order because I feel like this NARS collection, did it release in May? I can't remember. The NARS X Air Dem collection, it didn't get very much play on YouTube. It didn't get any play on YouTube, I don't think. And I died when this released because I was such a hardcore NARS fan. NARS is probably the brand I was the most loyal to up to and during my no-buy year. I'm not really that loyal to them anymore because they've been such a snooze fest lately. But when this released, it was not a snooze fest. The packaging was to die for. I'll be putting the pictures up on the screen so you can see the packaging. And I think it was that soft touch that Joe and I call that feeling the shark skin penis. The feeling of that soft touch packaging. And it had those flowers, illustrated flowers on it. Oh my gosh, there were 2 pieces in this collection. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't been on a no-buy, but there were 2 pieces that I really, really wanted. One was one of the eyeshadow palettes. It was the darker one, the Strange Flowers eyeshadow palette with the green, dusky green in it. And then the other thing that I really, really wanted, like I was like sick to my stomach because I wanted it so much, was the NARS Air Dem Poison Rose Lip Powder palette. Because I love a diffuse powdery lip look. And the idea of a NARS lip powder palette, I literally could not have dreamt it up myself. Like it's like so the thing. It was too much, I felt. Too put upon that a thing like that would release during my no-buy year. I wanted it so badly. I wanted them both. They're each $49. But I particularly wanted that lip powder palette. Needless to say, I did not buy either of them. I was on a no-buy and they're long gone. They're not available anymore. But gosh, that Poison Rose lip powder palette, that still does get me going a little bit. That was pretty. That was pretty. All right, the Dior Backstage Glow Face Palette. Oh my gosh, I wanted this so bad for so long. It's so funny to think now about the passion with which I longed for these things. It seems so dumb now. It's like when you're in love, like when you're young and in love and you're like so romantic and passionate and would like do anything for the person and you like cry your eyes out every night or whatever, depending on how well it's going, I guess. And then like 2 years later, you're a little older and you haven't seen the person in a year and you look back and you're like, literally, what was I thinking? Like, not necessarily that like you're foolish to fall in love, but that the feelings were so intense. And for that guy, and granted, at this time, my brain was still very much the old brain. Like I was still very addicted to wanting things and then obsessing over them and having that be where my dopamine came from, my sense of excitement, the texture in my life. And that process of obsessively wanting things was the way that I distracted myself from my problems, not just my day-to-day problems, but my deeper problems, my more deep-seated problems. I talked about this during my video about how my no-buy year changed my life. It was easy for me to get trapped in obsessively thinking about wanting something. And boy, did I do that with the Dior Backstage Glow Face Palette. I thought about it so much. I was convinced I was going to buy it when my no-buy was over. It was $49 for 4 glowy face shades. It's so whatever. And I didn't buy it after my no-buy ended. I thought I would, but I didn't. I have the Natasha Denona gold palette on here. I did receive that as a Christmas gift, but even though I received it as a gift, it totally counts as a palette that I wanted but did not buy. I'm also pretty sure, I'm not even pretty sure, I'm really sure that I would never have bought it because it came out towards the end of the year, and by the end of the year, I was at a point where I don't think I could have talked myself into spending this amount of money on a palette. So I'm really lucky that I got it for Christmas, and I do love that palette, but it belongs on this list because it's a palette that I wanted and didn't buy. And if I hadn't gotten it for Christmas, I wouldn't own it. The Natasha Denona Mini Star palette, same thing. I really, really wanted it, and I would absolutely have purchased that if I hadn't been on a no-buy because the price was right. I received it as a gift, and I recently decluttered it. Go figure. $25. The Kevyn Aucoin Nude Pop palette, same thing. The Kevyn Aucoin Nude Pop palette, it's almost, I do love that palette, and I do love it. It was the same thing. Like I wanted it so bad. It was another thing I was like really gunning for receiving it as a gift, a holiday gift, like a Christmas gift. It was on my wish list. I was really hoping someone would get it for me. Nobody did. I think that then it wasn't available anymore, or it's also, even at $57, was still too expensive for me to buy myself with my budget. I just didn't think about it in January. And then some months into the year, well into this year, a subscriber sent hers to me because she said it didn't work for her oily eyelids. So I've been able to enjoy it, but it's the same thing. It's like by the time I actually received it, months and months later as a gift, I just feel the same way anymore. And I was so elate. I mean, I'm not ungrateful. I'm so grateful to have it. And it just made it through my severe eyeshadow palette declutter. So it does spark joy. It's just that it can never spark joy commensurate with the passion I felt back in 2018 when it was newly released and I really, really, really wanted it. The Bobbi Brown Infrared Eyeshadow Palette, remember this? So we're getting into like last year's holiday releases, and this is so interesting because I really wanted this weird Bobbi Brown palette, and it's gorgeous. I'll put the picture up on the screen. Bobbi Brown knocked it out of the park with this. It was very fresh, it was contemporary, it was relevant, it was fashion forward, it's kind of style forward and makeup. I mean, it was a good one. It was a good release. I think it had some duochromes in it. The colors, it's just gorgeous. When I looked it up and screenshotted it for this video, I was like, Bobbi, you shouldn't have. Like, I was just like, whoa. It's very, very pretty. I really wanted it. It was $39, but I didn't buy it either before or after my no-buy year. I mean, during, obviously not before. I didn't buy it during, and I didn't buy it after. The Pat McGrath Bronze Seduction Palette for $125. Ooh, did I want this? Ooh, did I want this? And it was on my Christmas wish list, along with the Natasha Denona Gold Palette and the Count Quantum Nude Pop Palette, but nobody got it for me. And then, of course, I didn't buy it for myself. I've never bought it. To me, it was like the first Pat McGrath Mothership palette that was calling to me, and for that reason, I wanted it, because I was like, I'm gonna have to try her formula eventually, which I no longer think. I mean, maybe one day I'll try it, but I no longer am like, this is the one I've been waiting for, I've gotta get it, you know? Which I think I could have been like if I'd never done my no-buy. The thing that's interesting about this is that the Bobbi Brown one is long gone. Like, nobody is talking about it. Nobody's like, you never hear a peep about that. I don't even think I saw anyone review it. But the Pat McGrath one, maybe because it was not limited edition, people are still talking about it. It has stood the test of time. Just worth mentioning, but you know, I didn't buy either of them, nor am I going to. The NARS Atomic Blonde palette, ooh, I wanted it. I wanted that so bad. It was $59, and it was so ridiculous for me to want it because it had two huge face powders in it, both of which were too dark for me. And then it had all of these neutral bronzes across the top. I just liked the idea of being someone who would have done every eye look as like a smudgy, put in with a sooty thumb, cool girl thing. And I was like, if I have that palette, I'll be cooler. I'll be more like Mariah Leonard. That was how I felt. And I felt it strongly enough to really, really, really want that $59 palette. But by the time my no-buy era was over, it was out of stock. Probably wouldn't have bought it anyway. The Dose of Colors Pretty Cool palette. How bad did I want this? Oh my gosh, I wanted this palette so badly. I fixated on this. It was the same thing. It was this thing of feeling like I didn't have cool tone transition shades. And the joke's on me because I don't even really use transition shades anymore. I just buff whatever's on my lid up into my crease. And then sometimes I like gently tease it out with a transition shade, but I no longer do that kind of like rainbow gradient layering down from the brow and into the eye like Jaclyn Hill taught me back in the day. I just don't do that anymore. So it's so funny that I was just like, I can't do my makeup without the Dose of Colors Pretty Cool palette. It was for months. My passion was so real that I wanted it and wanted it and wanted it. I was like, it's only $32. If I wasn't on a no-buy, I would have had it months ago. By the time my budget rolled around, I was over it. All right, and then the last release of 2018 that I super wanted was the ABH Sultry palette. I loved everything about it. I loved the packaging, the colors. I even really liked that blushy color in there. I just thought it was so perfectly balanced. I knew that I didn't really like the ABH formula, but I was so tempted by that palette. It too was on my Christmas wish list. I really, really wanted it. And then by the time my no-buy year was over, it was on sale and I still didn't buy it. And I just kind of was like faced with the actual reality of budgeting and only having a finite amount of money to spend on makeup, which was always true. I just didn't recognize it before. I was just like, it's a little bit neutral. Like I have a lot of neutrals. And Alter Ego sent me their dupe palette, the Temptress palette. The formula is beautiful. It's a beautiful dupe palette. So I had that in my collection for months, and I loved the formula much more than I liked the ABH one. So I got decent use out of it, but the color story just wasn't enough to like keep me reaching for it. The metallics are incredibly creamy and beautiful. Those bronzes, it's like it's got it all, but nothing more. And at this point, I need something more to make me excited about reaching into a palette. So I actually ended up decluttering it. I didn't have the exact sultry palette, but I had those colors in a formula that I love. And I decluttered it because I was just like, I have so much, like I don't need this. It was just too basic for me. So in essence, I sort of had it and then decluttered it after wanting it so badly. All right, I don't have anything to drink. I usually have something to drink next to me. My voice is getting like very owie. So I'm gonna get a little bit of soda water, and let's also go ahead and have our ad break, and then we'll talk about the releases that I've wanted this year that I haven't bought. We're back. And there are so many fewer things this year. It's really interesting. I think the process of wanting a lot of individual things during my no-buy year and being forced not to buy them, and then just months later realizing that I didn't want them anymore, even though I'd wanted them so badly. I think that going through that process for a whole year really drove home to me how fickle I am and how unreliable those desires are, even when they feel really, really intense. And it just made me less susceptible to the excitement of new releases. So there have been many fewer things this year that I can say with confidence I actually wanted. But there are some. The first one was the Viseart Liaison palette that I released towards the beginning of the year, that purple palette. Ooh, I wanted that. I really loved the packaging. I like the idea of Viseart a lot. Like the idea of this sort of luxury made for makeup artists, beautiful saturated colors, the best of the best formula. Like I like the idea of that a lot. So I was always like waiting for Viseart to release something that really drew me in. But the packaging is so not commensurate with the pricing. And so most of their packaging, I hate those like cardboard foldy uppy ones. It just seems so cheap to me, like a greeting card. The plastic ones I'm not really into, but this is the one Viseart packaging that I really, really love. That's the sort of metallic, the brushed metal compact that's in a square. I'm all about that. I really think it's beautiful. So this was in that format. And it was this beautiful gradient of like purples and orchids, and I just really, really, really wanted it. And at this point, I feel like not only have I forgotten about it, but literally everyone has forgotten about it. So I'm glad I didn't spend the $49 of my budget. The Natasha Denona Bloom Blush and Glow palette. I wanted this so badly. So remember I was talking about how that first giant face palette release really drew me in? This felt like the more reasonable, $55 reasonable version of that. It was like, she's releasing a little version, like a sort of edited version of that kind of face palette for people who don't want to spend so much money. And I'm just a sucker. I'm a sucker for the aesthetic. I'm a sucker for the packaging. I'm a sucker for the glamour of Natasha Denona. I love her. I love everything that she does. I really wanted this palette in spite of the fact that it's very cool toned and I just wouldn't have enjoyed wearing it. And I had to talk myself down actually pretty intensely from that. I think around the time that this released, a subscriber had sent me a gift card to Sephora, and I almost rushed right out and purchased this with that gift card and reviewed it on my channel. I had this moment where I was like, I gotta be the first one to review it. Everyone's gonna want to know about it. And then it was just like, no. It was interesting to feel myself like caught up in the hype of like quick reviews and like getting the views and all this stuff for a moment. I think it was sort of the very first time that and sort of one of the only times, because I've mitigated that. I've tried to like stay grounded and not get sucked into that. But it was really interesting to watch me go through it. I really wanted the palette because I was just, in spite of the colors, it was like the idea of it that I wanted. I didn't actually want the product inside. I wanted like the idea of the palette. And I liked the idea of reviewing the palette on my channel. So it was the beginning of having to like sort out the idea of a thing from the thing itself, and to sort out the idea of reviewing the thing, or the idea of talking about the thing on YouTube, which was kind of new to me, is still kind of new to me, but I feel like that was the first product that released where I was like sorting out all of these strands of desire from each other. And when I sorted them all out, I was like, Hannah, don't buy this palette. It would be so dumb. So I didn't. Now we have what seems like a huge leap in time. The next one is the ColourPop Sweet Talk palette. I can't remember if there were palettes that came out more towards like the middle of the first half of the year that I didn't want or did want, don't remember. I can't remember. I might be missing some things, but when I thought back over the year, the next thing I could think of was the ColourPop Sweet Talk palette. This was ColourPop's first foray into texture diversity. And before this, I had been saying, I was like, ColourPop needs to get on the texture train, because that was what Natasha Denona had that nobody else had. She had all of these textures in her palettes, and it made them so delicious feeling, so exciting. And I was excited that ColourPop was doing it, and it was so new, and it was so thrilling, and it was so the answer to my prayers. I really wanted this palette. I was like, the Sweet Talk palette, it's got a glitter in it, it's got duochromes in it, it's got a super shock shadow in it, it's got these mattes, and I love coral, so I really wanted that palette. I had spent my whole budget, or I didn't want to place a ColourPop order. I don't remember why I didn't buy it. And I'm glad I didn't, because at this point I don't want it anymore. So that would have been $18. And then the two little 9-pan square palettes that ColourPop has released that I wanted are the Main Squeeze and the Honey palette. I don't want the Honey palette anymore. I duped the vibes of it, and I realized that it's really just kind of a one-trick pony, and I have that trick already. I have that pony. The Main Squeeze, that may be true of the Main Squeeze too. It may be that I could create similar looks where I could dupe the vibes, but I feel like the very, very close gradient diversity of those watermelon reds for eyeshadow is something that I don't really have. That's a palette that I probably wouldn't depot. I would like to have the idea of that look in a single palette. So I may yet buy that one, but I don't know. Maybe I'll never order from ColourPop again. So that's $12 and $12 for both of those palettes that I wanted or want and haven't bought. Next is this one's so interesting, the BH Cosmetics Beautiful in Barcelona palette. This one came across my radar. BH isn't even really on my radar. Like, I don't check for them. I don't usually talk about them in my new releases videos. But when Angie was here and we filmed the new releases video together, she wanted to talk about it. And when I saw the pictures, I was like, I want it, because especially the swatches. I'll now put up a picture of the swatches. And they did them in like bright, direct sunlight, and they were so gleaming. The blues looked so yummy, and it seemed kind of newish to me. Like, I hadn't seen a lot like that. It was sort of like Mediterranean blue and like rusty tile and glimmering water. It really spoke to me, and the quality looked luscious, of course. Then I never heard anything about it, and I totally forgot about it. Wanted it, didn't buy it, totally forgot about it. And now, when I look at the images on the website, it looks so bad. It just looks dusty and flat and yucky. So I don't know what to believe. Needless to say, I don't really want it anymore. So that's $16 that I got back in my pocket, into my budget. The Dior Backstage Glow Face Palette Glitz. The Dior Backstage Glow Face Palette number 2. It's much more suited to me than the first one was. So I really wanted the first one for so long. Didn't buy it because I was on a no-buy. When my no-buy ended, I went to buy it. I actually went to Sephora, and I was holding it in my hands, and I was like, I actually don't want to buy this anymore, so I put it back. Then this one came out, and it's even better for me. It's even more perfect. And so I want it in a way that is like inherited from the old desire. Like, it's this echo of the old desire, but it's so abstract, and I just, when it came out, I was like, ooh, I want that too. But I just have never gotten it together to even think about buying it. I just want it. The Natasha Denona Coral palette. I wanted this so badly when it first released. I was so inspired by the color story. And indeed, the vibe duping palette that I made a little palette, many more shades than hers. And for each color in the coral palette, I sort of picked 3 or 4 similar colors. So mine was much more dimensional and robust, more glittery. There were higher highs and lower lows in my palette than there are in the coral palette. And that is probably to date my favorite little single individual palette that I've built from my singles. I really love it. I keep rebuilding it. I keep dismantling it to do other things with my singles and then rebuilding it. Every time I open it, I get like a rush of excitement. I just think it's gorgeous. So thank you, Natasha Denona. Thank you, Coral Palette, for stimulating me in this direction. The Coral Palette is one of my favorite releases of this year, just in terms of the color story, the inspiration, the editorial statement. I love it, and I really, really wanted it. But I'm glad I didn't buy it for the $48 because I have what I need and more when it comes to that same editorial statement. But boy, did I want it. And I think old Hannah, pre-know by year Hannah, would have bought that on launch day. All right, we're getting to some very recent releases. The ColourPop X Kathleen Light's So Jaded palette. I thought about buying it. I couldn't have this month because I bought that blouse, so I don't have enough budget left to buy it. But for the first, I would say 24 hours after it was announced, and then when it was released, I don't remember how close it was together, but sort of all of those, maybe more than 24, maybe like the first 3 days. I didn't say this to you guys, but maybe I didn't get a chance to, but I had decided to buy it next month. I was like, I'm gonna buy that as soon as my budget renews. I really wanted it. I talked a little bit about it when I did the video about my feelings about new releases. I was like, this is sort of the Jaclyn Morphe palette on steroids. The textures, the colors, I just was like, it's perfect. I love everything about it. I'm gonna buy it. I really want it. But those passions, they fade so quickly these days. And I just gave it a couple more days, and then I was like, maybe I'll buy it like if I ever place a Colourpop order. I think that was where I was when I actually discussed it on camera. I was like, maybe in the future. And at this point, just like a week. I mean, how long has it been? A week and a half since it was announced? 2 weeks? I no longer feel like I will ever buy it. I'm just over it. Over it that quickly. And I would probably be over it if I had bought it on the launch. I'm over it either way. That's $39 that I didn't spend. The Viseart, the Dark Edit palette, I think that this is such a stunner, and it's so me. I'm gonna put this on my Christmas wish list probably. It's the kind of thing I would love to receive as a gift, but it'll be no skin off my nose if I never own it. Again, that fiddly packaging, it's very beautiful. I love, again, the editorial statement. Like, I like these colors together, but I'm sort of like about it. But when it first released, you should have seen me when I got an email from Beautylish, I think, and I opened it and I was like, be still my heart. I was like, I've never wanted a Viseart palette the way that I want you. The Lime Crime Venus Immortalis palette. You guys did see me when I was talking about, I had just seen it, scrolling through Trend Mood. I was talking about new releases and I was like, what is this? It's so new, it's so different, it's so stunning. Like, I just think, I mean, what a release. What a release. I love it. I love what that palette is doing in the moment, like this landscape that we're dealing with now, with these weird rainbow trains going hither and thither. And it is not even a rainbow train. It's like a cameo. It's like a cameo brooch train. It's like a cameo brooch on a porch on a house in New England train. But it also glows in the dark. What is that? I didn't want to buy it, but I certainly want it. Like, I want it, you know? I'm like, I want you. But I'm not gonna buy that. $38, that's how much it would be costing me if I were to buy it. So at the end, I have put here the two palettes that I want the most right now. I have not purchased either of them. They are the Pat McGrath Midnight Sun palette, $125, and the Natasha Denona Mini Gold palette, $25. And I kind of wanted to pose the question for myself at the end of this. The question of whether, having gone over all of these palettes that I wanted so badly, has dampened my desire for the two that I want right now. And the answer is an unequivocal yes. Now I see them, the Pat McGrath Midnight Sun palette, and I think of last year's Pat McGrath releases. I think of how stale they feel now, played out, how much money it is for something that's only going to be exciting for a little while. I think of the Natasha Denona Mini Gold palette, the reality versus the dream. I think of my mini star palette that I just decluttered, the gold palette that I already own, the greens I already own. And it's just like, when I frame my current burning desire for these two palettes, the passion, when I frame it with this story of all of these palettes that have come and gone over the past 2 years that I'm so glad that I didn't buy, because I'm so glad I didn't buy them. I'm really glad that I didn't spend the money. And I'm also really glad that they're not here. I'm really glad I don't have these 35 eyeshadow palettes sitting here on my vanity. Well, with the exception of the couple that I got as gifts. But those are, I really cherish those. I'm glad that those are pretty much the ones that I have. You know, I only have 6 or 7 eyeshadow palettes right now, except for the ones that are in the Purgatory box. That's how I like it. So I'm glad in every way that I didn't buy the vast majority of these, that I didn't buy any of them, that I don't have the vast majority of them, and that I've forgotten about them. I mean, maybe I'll put these 2 little palettes on my Christmas wish list. I no longer think I'm gonna buy the mini gold palette. I saw some swatches and reviews of it, and it just reminded me that it's just a palette, just an eyeshadow palette. It's not this like dream, it's just an eyeshadow palette, and it would just be for making eye looks, which is something that I already can't do what I own. I can't do it justice in making eye looks because there's already so much of it and it's already so lush and diverse. So I'm putting both of them on the list. I haven't purchased the Pat McGrath Midnight Sun palette, and I don't think I'm going to. And I don't think I'm going to buy the Natasha Denona Mini Gold palette either. They're both on the list. At this moment, there are palettes that I want and haven't bought, and I think they're probably going to stay that way. So they are on the list too. I added all of these numbers up with my calculator because I can't do math, really. And the total came to $1,788 for 35 palettes. Sales tax in California is 7.25%. I did some fancy math here for me. So that percentage of my total for these 35 palettes would have been $129.63. So if you add tax, if I had bought them all in California and paid tax, I'm not even counting for shipping or anything, but I generally don't account for shipping when I'm talking about how much a thing costs, because I feel like there's a hidden cost for the transportation of any goods. So we're keeping shipping out of it, but the total plus tax would have been, drum roll, $1,917.63. That's essentially $2,000. It's $2,000 worth of makeup that I really wanted badly enough to buy. That's been pretty much the premise of this video. I wanted all of these things badly enough that if the wind had been blowing in a slightly different direction, or if I had taken a slightly different path, if I hadn't gone on a no-buy, if I hadn't been budgeting, I could have bought any, maybe most of these, maybe all, in a slightly different universe if I had taken a slightly different path. $2,000 that I'm so, so glad that I didn't spend. And it makes me even more sure that I don't want to spend those last little pieces of that $2,000 on the palettes of the day, the ones that I happen to really want right now. Because that's the thing. This is helping me see that the Pat McGrath palette and the Natasha Denona mini palette, they're just the palettes I happen to really want right now. And over the past 2 years, all of these palettes have been. If you had asked me, 8 months ago, hey Hannah, what's the palette that you happen to really want right now? I would have been like, the ABH Sultry palette. 15 months ago, if you'd been like, what's the palette you happen to really want right now? I would have been like, the Dior Backstage Glow Face palette. You know what I mean? Like I have a different answer every month. And it just helps to think like every month there's a palette that I happen to really want right now. And let's just have that be it. That's the beginning and the end of the story. Rarely ever do I go and then buy that palette that I happen to really want right now. That's just a thing that I rarely do, if ever. That's my life now, and that's how I like it, and that is pretty much the point of this video. Let me know what you think, and if you guys feel like going through the cathartic experience of listing out every single palette that you have really wanted and not purchased over the past year or over the past 2 years, and even putting in the numbers and adding up your total, do that in the comments. Join the party. Get on this train. It's fun. and really interesting, and definitely helps with perspective, which is what I'm always angling for here on my channel and in my current life of budgeting for beautiful things. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope that you are remembering to take extra good care of yourself this week so that you can be the most effective version of yourself as you do your work in the world.